Could you please just say your name and where you're from first?
Yeah, of course. Hi, my name is Molly Reed. I grew up in Los Angeles and Dallas, Texas.
Hi, I'm Leo Finelli, and you're listening to Generation Change.
This month, we are getting to meet Molly Reed. She is a 22-year-old organizer who has worked on progressive movements including gun violence prevention, student debt cancellation, and environmental justice. She recently graduated from George Mason University near Washington, D.C., with a degree of government and international politics, where she completed an honors dissertation looking into the polarization of gun legislation in the United States, and she is currently in a gap year before law school. She has recently joined Dream for America as their policy director. I spoke with Molly about her time at Mason, her experience lobbying in Washington, D.C., and her advice for self-care. So this is usually my first question for everybody I have as a guest on this show. What was your first call to action?
I first got involved in politics. I think my first experience with social justice was when I was 7, and my mom took me to a rally. But it wasn't until years later when I went to a rally about climate justice. And at the time, I was living in Texas, and I knew that our state was making some really important decisions on the environment, and I wanted to make sure my voice was heard. I think I was about 16 years old, and I went to a rally, and I felt really empowered by all the amazing people around me, and I just kept in that space, and here I am now.
So what are some of the issues and causes you've spoken out on?
So, the last 4 years, I've been working with the gun violence prevention movement. That's been a topic that I'm very passionate about. I think also issues like student debt cancellation, college affordability, also environmental justice, racial justice, gender justice has been something that I've been increasingly passionate about. I think all of these progressive issues, especially the ones we've really been vocal about the last 2, 3 years, are all intersectional issues. And so I pride myself in being able to work and act, organize for multiple causes.
So you do a little bit of everything.
Yes.
So now let's drop the pin and talk about where you grew up. So,
Yeah, so I was born in Los Angeles, California, but then we moved to the Dallas suburbs area when I was in elementary school, and that's where I mostly grew up. And there I was able to see just a diversity of opinions, and I really loved where I grew up, and it made me who I am today.
and are you coming to me from Dallas?
No, I'm actually in North Carolina. I am in a gap year between undergrad and law school, and so I've been using North Carolina as a home base.
I'm in North Carolina too. I'm in Charlotte. Where are you?
Oh, cool. So I'm right outside of Wilmington. I'm kind of on the coast, so I'm in Southport.
And then you went to college at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, kind of near Washington, D.C. What made you choose Mason and what did you like most about it?
Yeah, so I was living in Dallas and I really wanted to experience a community that was different to what I grew up in. And so I was looking at a bunch of different city areas around the country. And I thought, if I'm going to study politics, might as well study it in Washington, D.C. I loved the diversity at George Mason. I learned just as much from my peers and their backgrounds and their identities as I did from my professors. They're just incredible group of students. And I really loved how supportive the faculty seemed and the research opportunities. I was able to research every single semester of college, which I think is super important to my education. And yeah, I really loved my experience there.
And during your first year at Mason, Cameron Kasky, who was one of the student activists who survived the Parkland shooting, he visited your school as a guest speaker and you got to meet him. What was that like?
Yeah, Cameron was great. At the time, I was working with an organization called Students Demand Action. I was a part of their college chapter, which we then transitioned actually to a March for Our Lives chapter. But it was really great talking to Cameron, just to see someone our age who was able to just speak volumes. You could tell just by his presence that he was very passionate about gun violence prevention, and that we had the opportunity as young people to truly make a difference. And I think Cameron was just incredibly supportive of everyone in the gun violence prevention chapter at our school. And it was really great to meet him. And just I've been able to meet him and a few other organizers throughout the years from the Parkland area, and they're all just incredibly influential and supportive.
You also got to meet Representative John Lewis before he died. What was that like? What are your memories of him?
Yeah, meeting John Lewis is somewhat of an idol of mine. I try not to idolize politicians by any means, but he has done some incredible work, and his mantra, "Good Trouble," is something that I hold very closely to me, and is something that I think about probably on a daily basis in this activism space. I got to meet him after a roundtable with my honors college, and it was just an incredible experience. You know, he has seen so much history and so much progress in his lifetime, and to be able to see that as living proof of the progress, but also the lack of progress in our country, was just a really great weight in his presence. So it was an incredible experience, and I'm very glad I got to meet him before he passed.
Are there any other notable or interesting people that you've gotten the chance to meet?
Yeah, so I got to meet Senator Bernie Sanders when I was working with the student debt cancellation work. He was incredible. When I was sitting in doing the student sit-in for Build Back Better, I got to meet people like Senator Elizabeth Warren. I got to meet AOC, who was really cool. They were just really supportive, and it's great to see representatives who not only care but are uplifting youth voices. I think the coolest person I met Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan, who, as a future law student, is a big inspiration of mine. I really admire her for the level of writing she produces. Is just incredible. So yeah, I've been very lucky to meet some really cool people, and even more grateful for the support they have provided me and other youth activists.
And besides these political figures, what about the other youth activists? Have you met some other concerned young people who have really made an impact on you or that you really enjoyed meeting?
Yeah, I've working in March for Our Lives for a few years. I've been able to meet, David Hogg and his sister, and they've been great. I got to know Alea Eastman, who works with Team Enough, and she's just an incredible light and force at the same time. I loved working with her. I'm really inspired by all of my friends who work in the activist space. I know some incredible college activists who I worked with in the student debt cancellation. Magnolia Mead, she is an incredible environmental activist. I have a good friend, consider her one of my best friends, Maria Hernandez, who is just an incredible light, and I'm so grateful that we have her in the progressive space. Yeah, just really everyone, and even getting the chance to talk with you today, just being able to create a community of youth activists who we all have different goals, but we're all incredibly supportive, and we all can agree that youth activists need a voice in politics and in progress. It's just an incredible experience, and I've only felt support, so I feel really lucky.
So you majored in political science at Mason, and you also started a campus support group to help prepare Mason undergrads who wanted to get into law school. Why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so I will be a first generation law student. And in my first semester at Mason, I realized how much information I just didn't know. And I felt like part of that was because I didn't have, anybody in my life that went to law school recently. And my pre-law advisor, his name is Professor Philip Mink, he really spent that semester just teaching me everything I needed to know about the process. And I realized that, like me, so many students didn't have that opportunity to learn so many things. And so we created what we called the Sharp Pre-Law Group. And it was an organization whose main goal was just to educate and inform students on the law school application process, whether that's the LSAT or how to get letters of recommendations. And everything was completely affordable and accessible to them. We did not require any dues. We did not require any mandatory meetings. And we just did that so everyone knew that they were welcome. Everyone knew that no matter what they could contribute to the organization, they had a place there and we would always be there to help them. And it's one of my proudest things that I left at Mason. They're still going strong, and we have two amazing presidents right now who are continuing with the work. And I feel really grateful that we've had so much movement in the organization. We've helped a couple hundred Mason students on getting information about law school, and I'm very, very proud of it.
And now you're going into law school next year. So how do you feel about that?
I'm excited. At this point, I don't actually know where I'm going just yet, but I'm going to be studying public interest law. So I'm going to be working kind of in the intersections of law and politics. And I could not be more excited. I've been wanting to go to law school for as long as I could remember, and it's been a lifelong goal of mine. And so I'm very excited to start and, just dive into the legal space.
So also at Mason, you took a course last year in Washington, D.C. called How Washington Really Works. What was that course like?
Yeah, so that was one of my last classes I took at Mason, and probably one of the most memorable. So it was a class with George Mason University and actually University of Pennsylvania. They have a center in DC. And it was taught by Professor Stephen Pearlstein and Ezekiel Emanuel. Both are just incredible in their own right. And each week we chose a different period in American politics where they were trying to pass a piece of legislation, a really big bill or initiative, and we just dissected it. And it was incredibly informational. I think I learned more about how Washington works than ever before, and I was able to see how youth activism and lobbying and non-governmental organizations, but also how elected officials, how the president all kind of have to communicate together to get something passed. And I was actually able to use some of the skills and some of the knowledge that I learned in that class in my own activism work on the Hill at the same time. And that was really great, and definitely loved that class. And I think it was influential.
And a photo of you in Washington, D.C., in front of the Capitol, with someone dressed as a googly-eyed anthropomorphic version of the Build Back Better bill.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a bill, and it's sitting there on Capitol Hill. And I was like, I watched Schoolhouse Rock when I was a kid.
Yes, some of my first memories in politics was probably in elementary school listening to that song. And so we had this bill costume that we were using for some of our actions for the Build Back Better bill, and I knew I had to get a picture. And it's one of my favorite pictures to date. It's just so fun, and I think it somewhat pays homage to where so many Gen Z got their start with that Schoolhouse Rock song. So,
well, then right now you've just become a director for Dream for America. What is Dream for America? And
yeah,
what do you
yeah, I'm glad you asked. So, Dream for America is a youth-led transpartisan nonprofit whose entire aim is just to build youth empowerment in politics. As you mentioned, I'm really passionate about bringing Gen Z, whether they are old enough to vote or not, into the political sphere. And that's exactly what Dream for America is doing. I am their policy director, so I'm working on the legislative side, making sure that we understand what issues are most important to Gen Z and making sure that we're advocating for those. And then I'm also working with lobbying. So in the next few months, we are starting training with our team and then two others, and we're gonna get some lobby days on the calendar so we can teach high school and college age students how to lobby. And I think for me, lobbying has always been one of the most empowering experiences during my organizing years, and I'm really excited to be able to teach others how to lobby and to hopefully mobilize hundreds around the country.
What else are you working on right now?
Yeah, so in I'm in the process of joining a campaign for 2024. I can't speak too much about it, but I'm very, very excited about the potential for working also with youth engagement for this candidate. I'm also, I'm going to law school, so I'm finishing up that process now. I'm hoping to know, where I'm going to go in the next month or so. And so those three things have been really taking up a lot of my time, but we have a lot planned for Dream for America. And so I'd recommend everyone to stay tuned, and you'll see some big things coming from us very, very soon.
Is there anything that has happened along your journey that you regret or that you wish you could have done differently?
That's a great question. I think when I was lobbying with March for Our Lives a lot, I was in the lobbying collective, and we had something called the lobbying cohort, which was a smaller group of students who really pushed certain bills. And it got to a point where I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to try to get these bills passed. And I don't think that pressure was fair, given the entire system that was kind of pushing against us. And I think if I could tell, my younger self who was just getting into activism that she doesn't have to put so much pressure on herself, and I would tell that to any Gen Z activist. It can be really overwhelming coming into the space and seeing how much work there is left to do. But we'd much rather have you in the space, even contributing just a little bit than not having you in this space at all. So I think that's what I tell myself.
There are a lot of people who have come on this podcast and talk about their struggles to do activism and avoid burnout.
Yeah, I definitely think burnout is a major issue concerning activists, especially youth activists. I think we saw that a lot during COVID. One of the reasons why I chose to take a gap year, just academically and politically with organizing, I didn't want to be burnt out. And I think it's all about centering yourself, reminding yourself why you're doing this work and what your true intentions are, which is to make progress. And I think as long as you are organizing and you're organizing with love in mind, I think that you will be in a much better mindset.
What do you like to do in your spare time?
I love to read. I'm a big reader. I always am reading like 3 or 4 books at once. I also love to be outside. I love national parks. The last, few years I've been trying to go to a lot more, and I love hiking and traveling. And
Which national parks have you been to?
I was just recently in Sequoia National Park in Kings Canyon in California, and then I went to Joshua Tree, which is really nice. I'd recommend going in the colder months though, because it can get hot. I love Yellowstone and Grand Tetons. I think everyone should go at least once. If you're in the Northeast or the Mid-Atlantic, Shenandoah is amazing. I love the Shenandoah. When I was at Mason, I went a few times and I loved it.
I've been to a lot of places too and seen a lot of memorable landmarks and sites. I feel like travel has really opened me.
Yeah, it's great to get outdoors and remind yourself. I mean, I've worked in environmental justice for a really long time, and I think it's really important for particularly environmental activists to get outside and remember what they're fighting for. We're fighting for this beautiful planet. So I try to prioritize that as much as I can in my life.
And you said you like reading. What books are you reading right now, or what are some of your favorite books?
What am I reading right now? I'm reading a book called Beware of Small States, called David Hurst. It's about the Middle East, and my degree is in government and international politics, but I primarily focus on domestic policy. And so I think it's important that I stay up to date about world events, even if that's not my forte. I just actually finished the Hunger Games books again. I read those and that was really fun. And I'm reading a book called Return to Love by Marianne Williamson as well. So yeah, those are my
Is
three
this the
books right
same
now.
Marianne Williamson that's giving Biden a run for president?
Yes, it is. Yeah, she has, I think that book and another book that she more recently put out. But yeah,
Sounds interesting. And so, besides going out in nature, what do you do to take care of yourself?
I, like a lot of organizers, I think I've struggled recently with burnout and making sure I'm taking care of myself. And especially in the last year, I've tried to create a routine to make sure I'm prioritizing my mental health, my physical health. So I like to spend at least, 10 minutes a day actually meditating, and that's been incredibly beneficial to my mental health. I try to give myself a certain time where I'm allowed to watch the news and talk about the news and talk about politics, but around an hour or two before bed, I try to put my phone away with stuff like that. I think little things make the most difference in my routine. And I think just by prioritizing, making sure that you're being intentional with your work and making sure you're intentionally taking time for yourself, that makes the most difference.
And once you're finished with this gap year, this little time for yourself, what do you plan on doing?
Yeah, so I'll be in law school for 3 years. My current goal is hopefully to clerk after law school. That's always been a goal of mine. So clerk for a year or two. Right now, I'm leaning towards public defense after a clerkship, but I know that once you get into law school, that sometimes changes. So I'm open to different roles and different careers, but I kind of fell in love with the idea of working in juvenile public defense when I was an intern at my local district court. And I would love to be able to work with young children and teens in the legal system in any capacity.
Well, it was really nice talking to you tonight, Molly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leo. Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Molly Reed is a multi-hyphenate of activism. Her time in Washington, D.C. put her up close and personal with many celebrated progressive political figures. Molly says she tries not to idolize politicians, which is a good point because it's easy to look at politicians, activists, and historical figures as saviors or gods, to mythologize them, and to forget that they are only human. I think Molly also knows that she is only human. She never asks too much of herself. She reminded me that there's a difference between giving up and knowing when to stop or take a break. Just because you are burned out, or you need to stop, doesn't make you a failure. And in certain cases, saying out loud that you need a break is a brave thing to do. Finally, when this episode was recorded, Molly wasn't allowed to reveal whose political campaign she had just gotten a job with. But she recently revealed that it is in fact Marianne Williamson, President Biden's 2024 progressive challenger, whose book she read and loved. You can find Molly on Instagram at Molly K. Reed.
Generation Change with Leo Finelli is hosted by Leo Finelli, executive produced by Julie Finelli, and edited by Nick and Leo Finelli. Our original music was composed and performed by Leo Finelli. Thank you so much for listening.